Welcome back. Now, the Sunday Times media publication says that internal documents at Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, Prasa, revealed an investigation into two suspicious payments totaling 30 million rand. Now, the first of the two amounts, which was made in October last year, relates to Ethekwini municipal rates, while the second payment went to a company that refurbishes Prasa's coaches. The amounts were diverted fraudulently to two accounts and in tranches of 15 million rand each. According to the report, Prasa says it has already recovered 19 million rand off the 30 million. Now, this case is one of the many cases saddling the state, and it is supposed to provide an efficient, safe and cheap form of public transportation to millions of commuters, but then it has to battle this. Prasa has instead been crippled by mismanagement, corruption, theft and vandalism of its infrastructure. We're joined now by a journalist on the story and senior investigative reporter at the Sunday Times, Thanduxolo Jika. And Thanduxolo, good morning. What a story. I mean, I was reading this on Sunday and the mind boggles. But please tell us more about the background to this.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to the viewers. Essentially, I mean, what the story presents for me, it's just a bit of further evidence in terms of lack of governance at the state-owned parastatal Prasa. And how the checks and balances are actually being subverted, for people to gain financial gains at the state-owned entity. And you would see, I mean, on numerous occasions, there have been a lot of questions around issues of governance at Prasa. Recently, we also, published a story where the board chairperson of Prasa simply went and occupied a Prasa-owned property, which was meant to house executives whenever they visit Cape Town. And there are many of these examples that happen, and now Prasa says they are conducting an investigation. Also, in this 30 million rand that was diverted, they're saying they're conducting another investigation. And this brings to question quite a lot in terms of governance at the institution itself.
It certainly does, because those checks and balances are either not in place or have somehow found a way to fail, Thanduxolo, because, just reading your report, this 30 million rand in question, one would imagine that a person who opens a bank account or an entity, a company or whoever it may be, would actually have to furnish details so that they are FICA compliant. So how then is it that these people got away with this? Because I was just thinking, reading that, if I send money, let's say I'm trying to send 200 rand to Thanduxolo Jika, and the account actually reflects that that's not the name attached to the account, the bank would usually notify me that something is wrong here. So what happened?
Absolutely. I mean, in this case, when you read the statements made to the police, the people who were effecting the payments simply say that they don't know who changed the banking details of Ethekwini municipality and CTE, the engineering company that is their own supplier. They seem to say that they have no clue how these details were changed at the tail end. And it raises quite a number of questions because, in one of the statements, one of the individuals says that these can only be changed by authorized people in the finance department. It is not a matter of just changing that bank account. And surely, with those kind of amounts involved, one would have checked if the banking details correspond. And which is why now the cops are also asking questions and saying, can this system, the payment system, the SAP system, be actually interfered with remotely, and by who? If that person, do they need a username, login details to do this? And if it's not done remotely, meaning that it was done internally.
And this is the million-dollar question, because you would imagine, or I think any right-thinking South African would think that there has to be a DNA trail in terms of that transaction. Who, at what point, did what on that particular transaction. But hey, we await the outcome of the investigation. And this is not all, Thanduxolo, because last year, Prasa announced that 11 officials had resigned and 33 were suspended, going through disciplinary action after being implicated in a 3.5 billion rand locomotive tender that was linked to that 2013 Swifambo rail leasing tender. And that deal was found to be corrupt and tailor-made to the company by the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2018. Now, what are the latest developments on that front?
Well, Sakina, it's quite interesting when, Prasa takes people through disciplinary processes, etc. Most of the time, or on some occasions, in fact, they seem to be just led by suspicion because they lose cases, in the labor court, etc., and then they're directed to settle. I mean, one case is that of Mathangoye, their legal head, who's currently on suspension, and she has won each and every one of these cases, and recently won the internal disciplinary process. And they've been trying to say she was involved in this tender, the Siangena tender, etc., but they don't seem to win any of them. So in a way, you find that sometimes it seems as if there is just a rush to claim that certain individuals are allegedly corrupt, etc., but backed up with absolutely nothing. Look, I mean, currently, as we speak, at Prasa, taxpayers are paying for 3 positions of legal head there at Prasa. Martha is on suspension and getting paid. There is Tato Tsautse, who was an acting legal head, whose contract had actually ended. We're paying for that individual, and there's a third person they have now appointed for 12 months in the same position that taxpayers have to pay for. So there are statements being made, and by processing that we are dealing with corruption, we are acting, and here are the individuals who are taking them through disciplinary processes. But when you follow through and check the processes, the DC hearings, the labor court methods, they come back empty-handed. And so far, I mean, there might be those who are actually guilty of something, but nothing has come to conclusion majorly.
As I understand, only one person has been fired of those 33 who've gone through the disciplinary processes. Who knows where the others are going to end up. The Mathangoye saga, as you say, she's on full paid leave, as it were, during her suspension. And then the other matter you touched on, you reported on this about a week ago, Thanduxolo, the internal inquiry into chairperson Leonard Ramatlakane, following that report that he moved his family into that luxury house in Cape Town. He ended up hosting, I believe, a 70th birthday party there, but that's about that. And looking at the fact that Prasa recently also spent 2.5 million rand on upgrading that house, where's this going? Where's the inquiry? Again, anybody being held accountable? It seems there's a lot of governance failures going on at Prasa.
Absolutely, Sakina. I mean, with this one, even the board members themselves, who are Mr. Ramatlakane's colleagues, were in the dark that he was actually staying in a Prasa property, and that it raises a lot of questions. If yes, his house is being renovated, sure, but he should have found alternative accommodation to avoid a question of whether there's favoritism at Prasa for allowing him to stay in that house. As it is, it has been difficult for Prasa to actually tell us how much is Mr. Ramatlakane paying for staying in that house. And simply the only thing they could tell us was that it's market related. But internally, our sources have also said, actually, he hasn't paid much for that place. He could have gone and looked for an alternative accommodation, not where he is a board member, where he has actually power, because there's an issue of power relations. Even if they say that, no, he went and negotiated with Prasa Properties department. There's an issue of power relations. He is the board chairperson of the state-owned entity. Which executive or any official at Prasa would have said, no, Mr. Ramatlakane, you can't stay at this house because you are a board member. So there's those governance issues that are at the heart of Prasa's failures. I mean, for example, Sakina, in October 2020, the High Court in Pretoria, a full bench, orders that Prasa should not actually. In fact, it finds that the contract with Siangena was unlawfully awarded, and that there should be an independent engineer appointed to check who owes who money here. Did Prasa overpay Siangena, as it was alleged in the derailed report by the former public protector? That has not happened. Siangena instead goes to court, of course, to appeal. They lost that appeal. But before that actually happens, Prasa, and also that meeting was negotiated by the chairperson, Mr. Ramatlakane, where Siangena says they want to talk settlement. How do you talk settlement with somebody that the court has found to have unlawfully benefited from a contract? And the simplest thing to do is to appoint an independent engineer to assess who owes who and what should happen next. That process since 2020 has actually not taken place. Again, it's a question of governance and what is actually being protected here, or who is actually being protected. So there are those things that raise quite serious questions. The issue of Mr. Ramatlakane occupying a state-owned entity's property raises quite a lot of eyebrows.
It certainly does, among other things. Thanduxolo Jika, thanks so much, investigations journalist at the Sunday Times, speaking to us on some of the shenanigans at Prasa. You'll remember that Chief Justice Raymond Zondo also called for a special commission of inquiry to probe the passenger rail agency, and he had recommended that a new probe be instituted in order to get to the bottom of why the state-run passenger rail agency was allowed to slide into almost total ruin. So let us know your thoughts at Morning Live SABC.